Okay, I'll continue to monitor the waiting room. And in the meantime, maybe you could introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about the session.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anne. Well, welcome everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to come today and just join me for making the case for using the right data. So we'll talk about a lot about, what are some of those data points that the customers I work with in Anthology are using for their engagement efforts now, and new ways of collecting that data, bringing in a lot of examples from other higher ed institutions across the country. My name is Tessa Burke. I work out of the Chicagoland area for Anthology as a team manager on the customer success team. And if you came here today thinking that you were going to hear from someone from iModules, that is in fact still the case. So I worked for iModules for 4 years, and we have now joined forces with campus management and campus labs to form one new company, Anthology, which we're really excited about. So now through Anthology, we really offer those EdTech solutions throughout the entire student life cycle, starting on the admission side and then all the way through the work we're doing on the alumni and advancement space. Myself and my team continue to focus on alumni advancement and advancement services and supporting your offices. And in fact, before I came to iModules 4 years ago, I worked for 10 years as a customer myself and have spent my whole career in higher ed and secondary ed. So definitely try to bring that experience to all of the work that I do with customers. And anything else that you needed to go over just in terms of housekeeping before we keep rolling here?
There's really nothing else. People who came in just recently, if you have a question, put it in the chat. I will monitor that and make sure that it gets aired. And I will let everyone know when we're near the end of the session, say 10, 15 minutes out, so that people can finalize their questions.
That's great. Perfect. I appreciate that. And I'll try to take some pauses throughout just to see if there are any questions. I, of course, welcome them. And you are an expert in this subject as well. So please feel free to join in the conversation yourself at any time. It's so great to have you here. So just a little bit more for those of you who aren't familiar with Anthology and what we do within this space. We're really the suite of interconnected modules that works across alumni advancement. So everything from online giving forms to content management systems, an email marketing platform, event registration, and now more and more with data analytics, which we'll get to a little bit today. Those are the various services that we provide to our customers. And my role as a team manager on customer success is to make sure that my customers are being successful with the software. And when I'm looking to see how we're measuring success, we're looking across these areas, right? So are you gaining efficiency through the platform? And for us, that often comes with having a singular platform that syncs with your database of record. Are we helping you to increase engagement? And more than ever now, we're all operating in this virtual world, right? So that digital engagement becomes even more important. When we look to building your legacy, I'm talking a lot about kind of what is your brand, and how are we helping to amplify your brand within this space? And then finally, of course, elevating fundraising, which is where we'll spend a bit of time there today. We'll really be focused on the two areas of engagement and fundraising as we look at data moving forward. So that's enough about Anthology, though. I want to spend the rest of the session really focused on you and hopefully providing you some good information today. So I want to start by just kind of posing the question and setting you all in the right state of mind for this conversation. We all talk about data all the time, because when it comes to digital engagement, you really want to create that very delightful, personalized experience for your constituents, right? We all probably recognize that a positive experience with the university can really yield major dividends in all of your engagement efforts. However, there's that risk of getting it wrong too, right? Because from the alumni or donors perspective, bad personalization is going to equate to a bad experience with the institution. So what are those really kind of cringe-worthy moments when it comes to personalization within your communication? Well, how about when an email is addressed to the wrong person, right? If I receive an email with any other name than my own, even if it's the name of one of my family members, it's going to leave me with that really negative impression that the institution doesn't know me. And even worse, and I've had this experience in my career, which started in Marcom, you send that constituents that email address to first or first name. Yikes, right? This is why the work that all of you do, no matter what your role is, if you're attending this conference, you have a role when it comes to data and creating this personalized experience. And you do this on a daily basis. And it's just so incredibly important to your institution. Delivering that truly personalized experience, it requires more than just knowing the constituent's name, right? So we'll spend a lot of time talking today about capturing and using the right data as we work to avoid some of these cringe-worthy moments moving forward, while also, again, working to increase our engagement and our fundraising efforts. I do want to kind of stay in this mindset of, framing the challenges that you all are facing, because they're very real right now, right? So first of all, reducing expenditures. To be honest, many of the customers that I work with were already experiencing financial struggles in recent years, but now comes this increased pressure that forces furloughs, those reduced budgets amid the coronavirus, as you all are facing reductions in revenue and increases in expenses as you work to bring your students, faculty, and staff back to campus safely. So something that I think is very real for a lot of the institutions here today. Secondly, building alumni and donor engagement. So more than ever, our partner institutions are tracking and analyzing engagement levels. So we're really starting to see this shift where alumni organizations are reshaping their role from simply delivering popular or targeted programs and services to serving as like this portal, right, between the institution and its alumni. So this role really necessitates and demonstrates value for your teams to build strategic partnerships across the university as you work to boost engagement with these populations. And we'll take a look at some of the ways we've seen universities doing that. Also getting better data, right? We talked about this in the previous slide and we're going to talk about it a lot today, but truly personalized communications require you to have good data that goes far beyond basic name and contact information. Your alumni expect you to know them. And the way you need to demonstrate that is by having and by using solid data on those constituents. I mean, building relationships differently with major donors, right? Major gifts fundraising is still for some institutions an intentionally kind of low-tech practice, as face-to-face meetings tend to be the goal for that group, right? But now more than ever, there's an opportunity to create a digital communication strategy specific to this population. And the right digital strategy really can support major gift fundraisers at every step of the donor journey, from those initial communications that range from kind of relationship building all the way up through stewardship. And then finally, as we look at some of the challenges that you all may be facing currently, we want to talk about meeting goals in the current environment. I mean, what a year, right? Hello, 2020. And as many challenges as there have been, I will tell you that the absolute best part of my job this year has been watching my customers just completely shift their strategies, throw away those plans and turn on a dime in order to continue to meet their goals in a way that's really mindful. That's all of all that's at play in our nation right now. So as we kind of move forward with this, I just want to really take the opportunity to commend the work that you all are doing, whether you're someone who works with Anthology or not. I have just been completely impressed with higher ed institutions across the country as they navigate through these challenging times. All right. Well, now that we've gotten in the mindset of what are some of those things that we're facing and what do we need to start looking at to overcome some of these challenges and take advantage of some of these opportunities, we're going to start moving into engagement data and trends. And I want to start with engagement by decade of graduation. So when we look at the combined data across institutions, we can see some really clear trends on the chart. And when you look at the chart, the darker the blue, that's going to signify the higher levels of engagement. A lighter blue is going to signify the lower levels of engagement, just so you can start to work through all these numbers without reading every cell in the chart here. So generally, the most recent graduates and then those graduates from the 1960s are going to be the most engaged, right? That's where you're going to see that darkest blue. But we can also see how they are engaging with recent alumni engagement stemming primarily from email and events, as well as site usage and also volunteering. So overall, they're engaging in a higher degree in all areas other than donations. And a key element to highlight here is their comparatively high email score. Recent alumni are reading email communications. Even though they may tell you otherwise, even though you may hear anecdotally across the institution that they're not reading emails, our data tells us otherwise. Now, part of this higher score, we have to, of course, recognize could be because you have better email addresses for this population, but that tells you something too, right, about where you may want to put your efforts with email acquisition. We'll talk about that in a second. The recent
Can I ask a question about that?
yeah.
When somebody gets an email score, do they have to click through on something, or do they merely open it?
So this particular score will look at email opens.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, moving on from those recent grads, let's look at the 1960s. You'll see some darker blue as we head across that roll as well. When it comes to the 1960s, they're the most likely to give the institution, right? But they also have a comparatively high email score. So there's an opportunity to further target email communications for that group because they know, that they're reading more of your communications. Also looking for email addresses for those individuals who you don't currently have addresses in this group could be a really good strategy because they're the ones who are more likely to read them. So maybe if you're going to do an email acquisition campaign, this is the group to start with, those in the 1960s for whom you don't currently have addresses. Then if you start to look at some of those lighter blue areas, I hear this from my customers all the time, the group that many of us traditionally are struggling to engage is that 1990s and 2000s group, more specifically the mid 90s to mid thousands. They have a lowest comparative engagement. So I don't know if this is a group that we're struggling with. I do hear from some that virtual events are possibly helping us make a little headway with this group, at least with an event engagement, because I think anecdotally what we hear a lot of times is for this group, they might not be coming back to campus because the period they are in their lives where they're very focused on career, they're very focused on family, they have young children at home right now. So as you look to your virtual events programming, there could be opportunities to re-engage this typically less engaged group. Right. So I want to step out of engagement by decade of graduation because that's something folks are often looking at, and just take a minute to look at the data we have that's based on engagement by school or college. The reality is that affinity goes well beyond when people have graduated, right? It can focus on student organization involvement, current industry, or as we see here, the school or college that they graduated from, as they may have stronger ties to their specific academic program than they do the year they graduated. So here we're looking at data from about 30 institutions related to level of engagement by school or college. And in looking at this, we can see some really clear trends emerge in the comparative level of engagement. So generally, professional programs seem to have higher engagement. So this is going to include law, medicine, engineering, pharmacy, IT. And then on the other hand, nursing, education graduates, along with graduate studies programs, specifically tend to be less engaged. This is generally consistent across institutions we see, and this type of information can really help you prioritize your own engagement strategies if you want to start to look at school or college. Of course, each constituency is different. You'll want to look at this type of information for your graduates specifically, but you can use open rates or event participation from the various schools that you have on campus to start to gauge whether your population is different. You don't necessarily need to do kind of the full analysis that we had done here. All right, and we are going to look at some specific examples later when I bring up some email marketing campaigns to see how some of our partner institutions have re-engaged some of this group, or at least increased engagement of this group via email, some of those who have the traditionally lower engagement.
I have a question for you in the
Yeah.
chat. It says, with young alumni being engaged at higher levels, how do you explain the low giving from that group? And what do you recommend to encourage younger alumni to also start giving as part of their engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So this is where it can help to look at preferences for type of communication from that group, and also compare it to kind of the perception of the communications they're receiving, right? And some of this is consistent across the board, but what we'll really see with especially that recent alumni group is you don't want to have a huge disparity where they're going to say that they're receiving solicitations, most often from you, when of course that is going to be their lowest area of interest, right? So it's giving them more of the content they want to receive, and maybe even personalizing communications to this group just to help continue to cultivate them to then make that ask later on in the cycle. We certainly see that giving days are a really great opportunity to get a first gift from this particular group. Oftentimes with days of giving, we're seeing a trend where our customers are moving more towards goals that are participation based and away from dollar amount. And a lot of that is because they're trying to acquire that recent alumni group as donors. So, perhaps it's doing a targeted solicitation to them that is asking for a smaller dollar amount if you're more interested in participation than gift size. So it's really, helping set goals for that particular group can be helpful. We also see, and we'll take a look at one example that isn't specific to recent alumni, but I think does get after kind of the content that I see tends to resonate with this group, is taking a more fun approach and maybe, taking this opportunity to experiment a little bit with what your solicitations look like and tailoring the message to kind of your younger audience to see if you can engage them in giving. All right, and I'm happy to chat about that more later. So even after we get through some of these examples that may be helpful to you as well. And you're going to hear me just talk constantly about email engagement today, right? Because it really is the key to successful engagement. You have to incorporate this multi-channel, personalized, segmented, targeted communications campaign to your audience. And from our research, we see time and time again, those individuals who are email engaged are also going to be more engaged in other areas. And that's really important, right? It's clear that email engagement is a key engagement area, especially given how much we know about the amount of information that we communicate either primarily or even only via email. So if a constituent is engaged with your institution via email, let's look at how that impacts other areas. First of all, they are going to be 3 times more likely to give or to join, for those of you who might be membership-based institutions, than those who are not engaged at all with email. Then they're going to be 12 times more likely to take advantage of any volunteer opportunities at the institution, raise their hand and participate as a volunteer. Finally, those who are in fact email engaged with your institution, and by that, again, we're just saying they have opened an email from you within the past year, they're going to be 17 times more likely to attend an event. And this is why email can't be ignored. And it's not to say you don't pay attention to all those other channels that you use to communicate with your constituents. But if you're sitting around the table at a meeting, or you're hearing from folks at the institution that email should not be an important part of your strategy, here is where the data tells you otherwise, right? And you all should have a copy of this presentation following today. This is always one of those slides I tell people to take back with them because to me, it's just so key to some of those conversations you might be having back at your institution. All right. So let's talk a little bit about email acquisition and valid emails. So first of all, really using data to focus your efforts. The engagement generated by your email marketing is directly related to your email address list, right? So a list filled with highly targeted prospects and customers is going to deliver you those really solid open rates and click-through rates. A great way to start with acquisition is identifying individuals to focus on based on other engagement data points. So like we just saw when we looked at engagement by decade, right? You want to look towards those folks first in terms of starting that strategy. All right. So reviewing alumni for life emails, this is one that's just come up kind of recently. We do find that those who have those alumni for life emails, those that are specific to your institution, have actually lower engagement rates. One of the institutions we partner with on engagement scoring data actually saw a 30% difference for that particular institution. So this may be something you want to look at just to see if there is in fact a difference for your own institution, and maybe start those conversations about, is that something that you want to think about perhaps discontinuing moving forward. And then finally, loading that information early. You know, ideally, you want to be doing that prior to graduation. So at minimum, when I'm talking with my customers, I'm trying to see, are they getting those email addresses into their records for alumni and advancement teams at least by the student's senior year. But more and more, we're seeing that come earlier on too. And this is where there could be an opportunity to establish more relationships across campus as well, where you can see, you know, is there a potential partnership with the student affairs team, for example, to get that great student engagement data, which can then help inform your efforts, because you know those who are highly engaged as students are going to be more likely to be engaged as alumni moving forward. But at minimum, starting to look for opportunities to get that non-institutional email address prior to when they leave your campus. And we will look at just kind of one or two examples of that as well. All right. So before I move into the next session, I can take another quick pause. And anything else in the chat?
I don't see anything in the chat, but if somebody's thinking of something, and this is a good time to ask. Okay.
All right, we will keep moving then. So taking email engagement one step further then, you know, I'm going to say it time and time again today, we're going to talk about personalization, because the more personalized the communication is, the more likely it's going to be to get a response, right? And part of this, just gave another webinar to some of my customers earlier this week with Giving Tuesday rapidly approaching. Giving Tuesday is a tough one to break through all that noise, because you have a ton of institutions participating in a singular day asking your constituents for money, right? But where you have an advantage is that you know your constituents in a way that a lot of other organizations don't. So by showing them that, you're going to be able to create a communication that stands out. Secondly, the less information constituents have to provide, the more likely they are to act. So this is a great opportunity to look at your event forms, look at your giving forms, look at those various calls to action, and decide how many fields are you asking for? And the information you're asking your constituents to fill out, is it all really crucial? And I know, you know, I worked Marcom at very small institutions, so I am very guilty of like taking the event form from 2 years ago in this very cyclical world we live in and just copying it over to the next year. If that's what you're doing, I totally get it, but sometimes it's good to take that pause and to reevaluate to see, you know, can we make some changes and revisions to this to make it an easier process for our donors or constituents to complete this form. We're also going to continue to take a look at the opportunities to help inform strategies based on data. So first of all, really thinking about what are the data points that are available to you and your teams to use, and how you might be able to use them in those communications moving forward. And then also really helping other teams think about who not to email, right? We don't always have to broadcast everything out to our full database. And in fact, if we want to see better email response, it's better to really tailor that audience down and start to focus your communications on those for whom the message is most relevant. All right. So I'm going to start diving into some examples here, which is always my favorite part of my job and of presenting at conferences, because I get to work with institutions across the United States who are, and internationally actually, who are all doing really great work as it comes to alumni engagement and fundraising. So we had a question earlier about our recent alumni group, and this is a great example to kick us off. This one comes from Northwestern University, my neighbors here in Chicago. We know that the more personalized the communication is, right, I just said it, the more likely it is to get a response. So Northwestern in recent years really began to focus on recent alumni engagement because they wanted to make sure that those ties to the institution did not disappear. Because once they disappear, it's so much more difficult to re-engage them later in life, right? So they developed a program to maintain and build engagement from this group by starting the engagement while students are still on campus with class-based communications and events. And then the program continues after graduation. So one of the reasons I'm talking about it here is because one of the key elements of that program is this class-specific newsletter that you see on the screen, which is sent once a month. It is done for the first 5 graduating classes. And one of the things that I really like about this is that the newsletter is sent on the day of the month of the year of graduation. So for the class of 2019, for example, that newsletter is sent on the 19th of the month. So before you think that the Northwestern team has time to develop 5 completely different newsletters, you can think again there. Each newsletter contains basically the same information and is in the same format, which makes it really easy to create. The content is always going to begin with that Ask the Alum section that you see. And then it'll feature basically 1 signature event from the Alumni Association, as well as 3 smaller events occurring around the country. They'll have campus updates in there. They'll usually have some kind of call to action, such as a request to update profile information. So when you look across these different sample newsletters, you'll see that Ask an Alum feature is the only thing that is personalized to the class. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about their strategy for that in a second. So they are segmenting this again for just those graduates of the last 5 years. And the reason they settled on that group is they looked at their own analytics. So they looked at the graduates of the last decade, and for them, they found out where the drop-off really starts to happen is after year 5. So rather than continue to have class-specific newsletters for that group of 6 to 10, they decided to focus on the most recent 5 years, again, in the hopes of retaining the level of engagement of that group. So the first one of these newsletters is going to be sent in August, which comes on the heels of, for them, a June commencement. So it's about 6 weeks after graduation. So it gives the graduates a little bit of time to disconnect prior to receiving this. So the initial newsletter received a 66% open rate and a 17% click to open rate. And I'll refer to click to opens throughout this just for how we refer to click to open. That's going to be from of those who opened the email, the percentage that then went and clicked through. Okay, so 66% open rate, 17% click to open. And a quick glance of this email showed that, the other following emails had rates anywhere between 27 and 38%. So that compares to an overall open rate for Northwestern Communications of about 21% and overall click to open rate of 4.9%. So you can see these newsletters are far exceeding that average email engagement. And once they no longer receive this alumni newsletter, as I said, they'll move into a more general newsletter pool, which is segmented by undergrad, staff, faculty, parents, and alumni. So I do just want to take a little bit of a closer look at this Ask the Alum feature real quick in the interest of continuing to talk about those recent grads and keeping them engaged. So when this project first launched, the content was a lot more generic and not related at all to specific class year. So this idea to kind of incorporate that Ask Alum section came as they knew they wanted to provide that more personalized experience with the newsletter. It originally started as a nomination form, but they weren't getting quite as many nominations as they wanted, so they changed it to simply give us a friend's name form. And this is another great way of collecting data, right? And possibly collecting data for someone who could be a missing alumni here. What I really like about this, especially when you think about the profile of Northwestern as an institution, is they're not necessarily looking for an alumni who's accomplished really great things. And in fact, they find that they are getting more interaction with people who have more typical paths. That's resonating a little bit more with their audience. So they'll just ask this alum 3 questions. 2 of the questions will always stay consistent from newsletter to newsletter. So the first is going to be, what are you up to? The second is going to be, how do you stay connected to Northwestern? And then the third question, they'll change up from newsletter to newsletter. So it might be something more seasonal. You know, right now it could be if there was one faculty member you wanted to invite to your house for Thanksgiving dinner, who would it be? Something along those lines. So that lead story is really going to have that class specific focus. And a couple other notes about this I think are important as you think about email strategy. They do adjust, because they have those really high open rates on this newsletter, they'll adjust their send times and days. And they do this as basically testing for their other email communications. So looking at when these perform best, and then using that to inform strategy on when they're sending other alumni communications. Also, one thing that has been really important for Northwestern as they look at their email data is making sure that they are sending communications like this from a staff member rather than from Northwestern Alumni Association, because the open rates are much higher anytime they're using an individual's name. So that's another one of those fast things that you can do some A/B testing on your own if you currently are sending all of your newsletters from the alumni team, the Alumni Association. Try using an individual's name and see how the open rates go up or not from your previous send on that letter. All right. Moving on to another great example here, I'm going to go to University of Pennsylvania. So University of Pennsylvania used segmented communications for an upcoming conference by profiling different speakers based on the department of study of the recipients. All of the speakers are listed in the email, but for each department, Penn changes the featured speaker to provide more relevant content. So all information in the email is going to stay the same, yet it's going to feel much more personalized here, right? So when you think back to that engagement data that we saw based on school program, you'll see that the example here highlights specifically on the left-hand side here, a graduate of the nursing program. So they're making content more relevant for the nursing college and sending it to specifically that group by doing nothing more than pulling that feature speaker in. Okay, so a very small tweak to the communication that makes it feel so much more personalized to the recipient. And I'm going to go ahead and show you one other way that they did this with kind of that same audience. They use segmenting campaigns for their e-newsletter as well. So on the left-hand side here, you're going to again see one that is specific to just the nursing audience. Newsletter tends to have an open rate of about 26%, but they saw what we saw in the engagement data for those nursing graduates, the open rate was much lower. So now with segmented emails, they're customizing the newsletter for different colleges, including nursing. But rather than creating entirely different versions and creating more work for their team by creating different content, all they're doing here is simply moving stories that are specific to that college up higher in the newsletter. So everyone's going to have the same lead story here, right? We want everyone to know about homecoming, no matter what college you graduated from. But then for that nursing specific group, we're going to pull in this nursing story slam event into the slot below the featured story. So just one more way of kind of personalizing things to them, including events. And I want to look at another example that's specific to events, because I know when I was in marketing communications working at smaller institutions, anytime I had to send out promotions for an event, right, it was send it as often as you can to as many people as you can. Right? But we know that's not the best strategy. And this is a good example of that from Syracuse. So this email in particular is for an event that they had for their New York chapter that was based on a Broadway show and having time with the director following the show. It was a higher price ticket, right? So it wasn't necessarily going to be something that a recent alumni would attend or their full audience would attend or people out of New York would attend. So usually, you know, when we start to think about segmenting that list, a lot of folks are already thinking geographically, right? And maybe only sending to folks in that metropolitan area of New York City. But Syracuse took it a step further here by also saying, because of the high price of this ticket, let's go ahead and only send this to those who have previously made a donation to the institution. And you can see what happens when you do that. This email had a 60% open rate and then an 11% click rate, right? And this likely would have been, you know, much, much, much lower if they had sent to that larger audience. And of course, what you really risk when you're sending something like this to someone for whom it will not resonate and who should not be in that audience is that it may be an opportunity for them to unsubscribe, right? So when we really talk about reducing the population and targeting groups more in email communications, to me, that's always one of the greatest benefits, is then reducing your unsubscribes in return. All right. So I'm going to pop into online giving next, but I will.
Sorry, I have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Others may know this, but what is conversions? What do you mean when you use that term, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking about conversions, you want folks to take that next step, right? So for email marketing, we're first looking at them opening an email, and then we're looking at them clicking through that email, and then did they go ahead and take that action of updating their profile or making a gift to the institution or registering for the event. And that's how we're looking at conversions as it relates to a lot of the data we'll see here today. Excellent. Well, I want to take a pause to I want to move forward talking specifically a little bit about online giving and how, you know, using data can really help those online giving efforts. But first, I just want to take a step back and look at where we're at with giving overall. So we looked across all of our partner institutions who are using us for online giving and compared what we saw for the full calendar year of 2019 compared to that full calendar year of 2018. And there was a 10% increase in dollars raised by all of our partner institutions. An 8% increase in the number of gifts coming through. And then now there's all these other things going on, right? So usually we're just looking at our data year to year, but we wanted to break this down a step further. So we took a step back and looked at, okay, now let's see what's going on with online giving during the pandemic. And this one really surprised me when we look at the data. I mean, here's why data is so important, right? We make assumptions, but then we need the data to back it up. And I would not have assumed this. So when we looked at week 11 through week 26 of 2020 versus those same weeks in 2019. So think late March when the lockdowns all started for coronavirus going into June, some kind of first half of that calendar year. There was also a 10% growth in dollars raised for the institutions we partner with during that time. So there is still opportunity here, and I'm going to show you some examples of some of my institutions who had to shift strategy due to the pandemic, but were still very successful with their fundraising efforts, and part of their success was in fact due to the way they use data. Just to throw kind of a few more stats at you, first looking at the impact of personalization on giving. So 25% of donors would give 25% more if they felt that it was a personalized communication to them. And that's where, again, that segmentation really is critical. And we'll see how schools are doing that. making that ask seem very personal by using the data that you already have, using those affinities, showing them that you know their last gift amount, the date of their last gift, right? There's an endless number of ways that you can do this as it relates to giving. So I'm going to bring up one of my favorite success stories and talk about our friends at University of Pittsburgh today with their end of calendar year's emails. So they had been deploying more than 444,000 emails soliciting donations for their alumni at the end of each calendar year. But this last year, they sought to really minimize those efforts and target specific alumni to really maximize their fundraising efforts. So at the end of the 2018 fiscal year, they used Encompass, our software, to begin a highly targeted email campaign with really strategic segmentation, and then also some concise messaging to reach alumni in a much more strategic and personalized way. The campaign was pre-populated with things like donor name, address, previous giving allocation. And their approach really drove their supporters, and the results on this are incredible. So first of all, they sent 370,000 less email solicitations. So they cut that total volume all the way down to roughly 70,000 from 444,000, right? This is a huge difference. And they saw an increase in open rates of 43% compared to previous years. Their number of donors increased by 91%, and the total gift dollars spiked 158%. So if you need a story about how reducing the amount of communications can increase your results, this is it. And we'll spend a little bit more time on this example just because I think it is so good here. So for the end of calendar year campaign, they opted to go with this fun, lighter approach, right? And so this is why I brought up that this could be a good type of approach too. If you're not comfortable with going this way for the full constituency, this might be something I would recommend for that recent alumni group where you're trying to increase that engagement rate as it relates to online giving. But they kept this very fun and light. The messages were short and focused. Particularly, they were highlighting the opportunity for donors to make that tax-deductible gift by year end, something that's, of course, very common as we all move into end of calendar year giving here. So they pushed these memes out via email, but also on social, where they generated a lot of social impressions. And of the 3 emails they sent as part of this campaign, the highest appeal yield was actually on that December 31st email at 37.3%. So one of the things, they didn't send all the emails to all non-fiscal year donors. They really focused on the analytics to identify groups of individuals to communicate with differently and look specifically at that non-donor group. So they adjusted who they sent emails to based upon the cadence of the emails of their different campaigns. And they had pushed to ask emails asked to everyone in the past, and they experienced that really large number of unsubscribes from their lapsed donors and their nevers when they were pushing out to that larger group. So for this particular push, they tried another route, and they targeted really appropriately. They segmented out those lapsed donors with the last gift email, just kind of notifying them of that date of last gift. And for the nevers, they sent emails only to those in the top score group for engagement. So if you had never given and had no other kind of engagement with the university, they were going to take you completely out of that group. But they would have left you in and done a targeted email to you if, even though you had never given, you were demonstrating engagement in another way. I want to continue to kind of look at this one here. So they're basically their observations, and what they attributed the success of this campaign to was a few different things, but really it was on these kind of targeted messages. So the previous one was the end of calendar year, and now I'm moving into looking at the end of fiscal year campaign, where they took a different approach, right? So they moved away from that kind of lighter messaging of end of calendar year, but took away the same lessons they had in terms of segmenting for LIBUNs, SIBUNs, past donors, never donors, etc. And for this one, they went with this goal of lighting up the cathedral, which is kind of this iconic building on campus. So again, shifting away from the very fun approach, but still gamifying it a little bit by really setting out that goal, putting the goal out to the donors and asking them to kind of participate in this campaign. There we go. So reasons for the success, first of all, they really gave alumni that goal to work towards by displaying the cathedral lights. Email was tokenized again with that last gift date, that last gift amount, and allocation of last gift to drive the new ask. In terms of the audience, looking at alumni live on Cybons, lapsed and never who had clicked on an email within the last 6 months. So then again, identifying some kind of engagement. And then it was really multi-channel, right? They're not just looking towards email, they were also doing things with text. And then of course, we talked about those big social impressions as well. So again, another successful campaign for them, 102 donors, an additional $10,000 in gifts, 25% open rate. And they did in fact get 15 donations from lapsed and never donors. So new donor acquisition there. All right. So I mentioned way back in the beginning, we were going to look at what are some of those opportunities to find partnerships on campus where you can in fact acquire more data. Let's go ahead and look at that. First of all, data is being gathered everywhere on campus right now, right? So the first place that you can always look to that I find is an easy win is event registration forms, particularly if you are, say for instance, focusing on that group of graduating seniors. Oftentimes there is an existing event on campus. It may not be run by your department, but there is an existing event on campus where these seniors are registering for that event. Is there an opportunity to partner with whatever department is running the event to add a field? They're probably already getting email address, but are they getting non-institutional email address? That's something to think about. So making sure that in addition to the institutional email address, you're getting the non-institutional one, which is likely to be their primary email address post-graduation. You also can look at, working with your alumni engagement office to add a field that might be helpful to your efforts over in advancement services. So one example of this is, oftentimes folks are looking to build out their business profile information. So adding things like job title and company, maybe that's something you want to think about collecting moving forward. Always including address fields. And, I know it's hard because on one side of the coin, we're telling you, be careful how much you ask for. But on the other side, there's so much value in collecting and having up-to-date mailing address. So really always asking for that, even if you're not collecting billing information because it's a free event. Having your teams cross-check those addresses to identify updates. So because you're getting address information in from all these different sources on campus, do you have a process in place to make sure that you are verifying those addresses and then feeding them back to your database of record? You really, again, want to make sure that you're capturing event registrations in whatever your primary platform is, even for virtual events. And so I think that this is a conversation I'm having with my customers a lot right now. We've moved to this environment where so many of our events are being hosted on Zoom or another platform, right? And I've seen a lot of schools move to just having the constituents register via Zoom, which in some ways works now if that's really the only platform you're working with for events. But my customers are kind of in the middle now. Some have returned to some in-person events. Hopefully, eventually, soon, we will all be doing that. And I also hope that we'll be maintaining some of those virtual events as well. I know I'm one of those 1990s, 2000s people who's really enjoying engaging with my alma mater virtually now in this environment. But you want to make sure that all that data is living in one place, right? Because what's not going to be helpful to you is if you have some event engagement data living over in your Zoom registration and some living in your database of record. So just make sure that you are capturing all of that in one place. You really can have a clearer picture of what your event engagement really looks like. Then looking at your giving forms, Again, we want to always include those address fields, but we want to limit other fields in order to streamline the giving process. And so one of the first things that I'll look at when I look at my customers' giving forms now, you know, if they've asked me for recommendations, is first of all, obviously you have email address on there. Do you have it on there twice? Because it used to be that we all wanted to verify that email address, right? I don't know that it's as necessary now to have folks put that email address in twice. So we tend to say as best practice now that just, you know, not having the verification field is fine, just having one email address field. Another good example is I see a lot of institutions will have something on there to collect a quote, you know, about why you're choosing to give to the university, which is great information to have. But are you actually doing anything with that quote or testimonial? Or is this the right place to ask for it? Can that become its own separate form that you send out to a more targeted group of those who you know are highly engaged rather than living on the giving form, right? Because you want to make the donor experience as quick and seamless as possible. Finally, just chatting about incoming phone calls really quickly. This is such an easy win for the office. Is everyone on your team, everyone in the office, anytime they are picking up the phone and talking to a constituent, are they asking to verify email address? If not, definitely something that I would consider. It is a quick win for email acquisition. And if someone is taking the time to call you, they're engaging with you in some way, right? So we want to make sure, because we know how important that email address is, that you're taking the opportunity to get that person's email address if you don't already have it. And finally, identifying the process for feeding data updates back to your team, right? So there's all these different folks across campus collecting all this information. How is it getting back to that database of record and the other databases on campus that are important, especially for data-driven decision making? All right. So I'll keep talking about it, but that contact information is key, right? So for students, again, capturing those non-institutional email addresses, and we'll look at an example, and finding that way to engage them again immediately after graduation. So whether that's with something like the Northwestern newsletter, or perhaps it is on the event side, having an event for them post-commencement. For alumni, including current contact information on communications, and I'll show you some effective ways of doing that. And again, being sure to not ask for every single data point every time you're reaching out to them, and being a little bit more strategic there. Finally, seeking updates at kind of every opportunity you have. So here's where we'll start. I'm going to start with this example from BU. So again, we know that having that contact information is really critical to engaging constituents. So BU did a renewed kind of focus on this a few years ago here, and you'll see some of these numbers dating back. But in 2017, after they started this renewed focus on email acquisition and profile updates, one of the big difference makers for them, you'll see they went from kind of 43,000 updates to nearly 70,000 in 1 year, is they began encouraging profile updates by including current contact information at the top of their monthly newsletter. A lot of institutions I work with, the reason I bring up BU is because they have it at the top. So this is something that I see is a lot more common among my customers. They're including that current contact information within their primary email communication. But usually it's located in the footer. If you really want to drive some updates, you may want to experiment and move around the location, or even consider putting it in your header like BU did to drive some of those updates. So this email on the right that I just pulled up is another good example here. This is triggered when BU loses home contact information for graduates as a way to encourage them to update the information. So it's this "sorry we missed you" email. The email goes out monthly to all individuals whose mailing addresses got marked as inactive during that past month. So here BU is really encouraging updates by sharing the outdated address information that's all brought in kind of by these tokens here. And it's a way to really raise their awareness that they're no longer reachable, right? They're not going to see their alumni magazine or other mail from the institution. And now it's really helped their efforts in terms of immediately getting that address information back. And move on just in the interest of time, because time is flying by here. But I had mentioned business information as well, so I want to bring up this example from University of Missouri, Kansas City. They created an email campaign specifically to collect employer information. So in this segmented communication, they also invited alumni to volunteer with UKMC. They sent out 3 rounds of emails with variation just based on having that current employer address. So you'd receive a different version based on whether you responded and whether you got that conversion from the previous email. The second round included 4 segmented emails based on response from the first round, with 2 new segments based on those who responded. So this one would have been different based on if they had previously indicated that they would be willing to volunteer or not. And then the third email focused only on those individuals who had not responded at all. And they encouraged their participation since they hadn't taken action on any of the previous emails by offering a $50 gift card. So the campaign was incredibly successful. They received updated information for over 1,500 alumni, and they also recruited more than 380 new volunteers from this campaign. So another one I'm happy to provide more information on, but a really quick win there. This is another one that is so simple. I love kind of whenever I present at conferences, I like to give something that's a quick takeaway that you could probably set up in just a few minutes if you could get the proper approvals to help with your data efforts on campus. So that's this example from Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Anytime an alumni comes to campus, the alumni office, of course, likes to provide a little welcome bag for that department that is hosting it to give to the alumni. But they were finding that a lot of times they simply weren't made aware that alumni were on campus, or perhaps they were aware, but there was another department on campus that would have liked to have known that this alum was there. So someone is presenting in athletics, but you want the alumni office to know. So they developed a form that is very simply an alumni visit to campus alert. So this is an internal form that can be filled out that gives all of that alumni's information, as well as details of their visit. And then it's then given to all of those departments internally who would have a record for a constituent and want a record of this visit. And something very simple, but something that a lot of institutions aren't currently doing in terms of that information sharing. And particularly for the alumni office, it's a great opportunity to make sure that they are getting that updated and accurate contact information for that very important constituent who's clearly engaged because they're making a visit to campus, right? All right. So one more good example here that's a little bit more on the donor side of things. This is an example of a highly personalized donor experience from Michigan State University. They developed this kind of customized donor portal where donors can log in and see their full giving history. This is something I'm doing a lot of with my customers right now. I'm just going to bring up this whole thing for you. But on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the giving and donor recognition, which is highlighted. So this is something that I would log into and that I would see is very specific to me. The annual donor recognition credit box highlights their giving for the fiscal year, and then also says how that will translate into their annual donor recognition level. And then what I really like about this, just in the interest of data, is that they were very specific on making sure that that donor contact information was there. So the current contact information is listed for the constituent. And there's also that call to action there where if that is inaccurate, it's very easy for them to update right from this box here. So this kind of brings it all together, right? In one place, we're seeing great uses of data, putting this information back out in a space that donors can access with their very personalized giving history, and also a space for us to collect data and make sure we've got that all important updated bio data from our donors.
I have a question. It says, does this prompt donors to their next gift?
It often does. So, usually that's being driven by an email solicitation that's driving them to the donor portal and then is making that ask to Also, you'll see that they have those outstanding pledge balances that are used here. So it's often being used to drive donations on those pledge balances as well. Okay. And certainly connecting out to the online giving form as well. I know this is so small, it's hard to see, but you'll see that make a gift button sitting right above that donor recognition box, so that, hopefully the intent is that if you see that you're only $50 away from that next donor recognition level, you're going to be more inclined to make that $50 gift to push you up to the next level. So very strategic, even in terms of the placement of things on this page, to answer that question. All right. I want to talk about one of my customers here in Illinois, because I was just so proud of this campaign. And I told you I was going to bring in some kind of COVID specific examples as part of this. And I think that, one of the things we saw, particularly in the spring, was a lot of our customers who had days of giving planned and then had to decide, are we going to move forward with that day of giving in this environment? Are we going to postpone? Are we going to cancel? Are we going to hold an adjust strategy? Or are we just going to hold as is? And I saw customers take every different path. So everyone made a different choice, and Knox did end up pushing theirs back a bit. So originally from the spring and then back to a June date. But even in June, we were still living in this COVID world. We're still there now, right? So what they had to do on top of that is they didn't want to push their campaign back again. So instead, they had to go ahead and adjust their strategy. So first of all, they really looked at their theme. And one of the themes they decided to focus on was about why the world needs liberal arts graduates and the impact liberal arts graduates are having right now within this environment. They did a ton of segmentation, and they aligned that segmentation to various challenges. So it was a way to reduce communication, but then it was also a way to really gamify the challenges on the day itself. So they definitely relied on those all-important advancement services teams to help with the segmentation and provide lists as they were going through this process. And they created a much more personalized donor experience. So not only did they have a successful giving day, but they also found that by making these changes, it was reducing the unsubscribes that they had seen on the day. So in the end, their results, they had they exceeded their donor goal by over 800 donors, with almost 2,700 donors supporting Knox. And they raised over $1.4 million. So hugely successful day for them. They also had over 300 alumni attending a virtual event, and over 50 of those became volunteers or challenge donors. So super successful day for them. One more example I want to bring in here is I'm going to kind of fly through the remaining slides to just make sure we have time for questions and to wrap up. But I talked before about, existing opportunities for email acquisition for that recent grad population, or that population of soon-to-be graduates. So this example comes from East Carolina University. Decorating graduation caps has long been a huge trend at ECU, and a lot of students, in fact, even were hiring professional photographers to take their graduation photos with their grad caps. So ECU decided to get on board with this and take advantage of this already existing tradition on campus, and partner with them and hire the photographers themselves and create a full contest out of the graduation cap decorating kind of tradition. So they started this a few years ago now, and they will get hundreds of entries every year. And they'll put together a video, which is shown the night before commencement, where they proclaim the winner. They use all of these great images on social media. And because it's a contest, it is an opportunity for them to get that data, right, from this very engaged group before they leave campus. So something as simple as this becomes an opportunity to obtain, again, that very important non-institutional email address. They do really fun videos too, so something else to kind of check out and look at. All right, so just kind of the last piece here as we, wrap up for the day is just thinking about how we're taking all this great data to the next level. And again, it's so wonderful that we have Anne here because we can all ask her questions as well too. But you know, thanks to CASE, we are all using this, you know, shared definition really of alumni engagement. And we at Anthology are really partnering with our institutions to help make sure that they have all the data that they need, and working with them to extract that out of our system so that they can provide that back and really look at those overall alumni engagement metrics. So when we're looking at engagement now, we're really talking about these following categories, right? So communication, which we've talked about a lot today, experiential, philanthropic, and then finally volunteer. And you know, for us at Anthology, we're thrilled that our partner institutions are taking a deeper dive within that data because we know how much it can inform their strategies and goals, and particularly how the various groups on campus can partner together and use that data to inform each other's strategies and kind of drive decision making. So for us, that CASE framework really serves as the starting point. And then we take a deeper dive into engagement scoring with our customers. We're actually very soon here in the next few months kind of rolling out within our product engagement scoring through a product called Decision Analytics, which will really help our teams better understand how alumni and donors are engaging. And once you understand that, that's when you can start to take some of the approaches we've looked at today and decide, you know, create some new segments for your end of year giving campaigns, to create new segments for your email campaigns, like we've seen with Northwestern with the recent grads. And really, once you determine those groups to focus on, not only does it aid in your efforts, but it also is going to hopefully reduce, you know, we talked about gaining efficiency all the way in the beginning. That's where I find a lot of success for my customers too, when they really start to take a deeper dive into engagement data and using it. You know, you think about that Pitt example we looked at when they reduced communications from 444,000 to 70,000, right? It's a great example of that. And then finally, using tools to identify those who are engaging at higher levels and where there is more potential there, right? Because that can help inform those other areas, and even, you know, something like a capital campaign coming up, having previously identified those higher engagement levels can help inform those efforts as well. All right. So we talked about some of these already, but I want to make sure I hit on every area. Certainly engagement scoring to assess progress as you go. So looking at those campaigns from year to year, looking at engagement trends, whether it be by things like decade of graduation or by school, college, but really being able to establish goals and then assess along the way. Certainly identifying new volunteers. And that may come even more in this virtual world as well, too. Do you have a new pocket of volunteers who can find a way to contribute to the university in a virtual format, who simply didn't have the ability to volunteer previously because they live outside of an area where you have an active chapter, for example? Really getting that better data from across campus. So again, partnering with those other groups. Growing that email engagement that we know is all important, and doing that by being more strategic and segmenting more communications. And then finally, as I talked about in the previous slide, really just kind of discovering prospects and hopefully increasing that financial support. So this is kind of the final slide here as we wrap up, because I know we're close on time, but when you think about potential opportunities that you can immediately take back, you know, coming out of the presentation today, here are some ideas for easy wins. First of all, those new places to collect updated information. So whether it be an email campaign like Missouri for business contact information, or something as simple as that ECU form to collect email addresses from senior students. And then identifying what are those easy data points that can be used to personalize your communication. So with end of calendar year giving coming up, is there an opportunity for you to incorporate something like that last gift or last gift amount? Helping alumni engagement, you know, giving teams think differently about using data to provide relevant personalized content. So whether it be Giving Tuesday, coming up for the annual giving team, maybe that's a way to target or that recent grad population, for example, and see if there's a message that you can have that's specific and personalized to that group, and then measuring the success of that. And then finally working towards these broader engagement metrics and having those inform your decisions moving forward, and really looking at the work that CASE is doing as well and leaning on that as a model. So that is it from me for the day. I know there was a mouthful at the end, as I wanted to give you all of this good information prior to the end of this session here, but I will do a check-in with Anne to see if there were any other questions that came through, or if there are some now, please feel free to drop them in the chat.
I did have somebody ask if the presentation will be available, and I assume that it will, because most of them are.
We will make that available. I know that Bob and the folks at Pacific Northwest Engage will make it available. I'm not even sure where they're posting them, but I know I will provide it. So yes, we'll have it up there.
I know they're collecting them and will be making them available to attendees. Any other questions? Okay.
Well, I appreciate the time, and it's always nice to see you too. And I will put my contact information up. Please feel free to connect with me. I love these conversations. It is the best part of my job to be able to dig into this data and to share really great examples from our partner institutions. So I'm always happy to continue these conversations.
Great presentation. I'm seeing in the chat.
Excellent. Thank you all so much.
Take care.
All right. Have a great day.
Bye.